Welcome to The Faithful Steward. This is a podcast all about sharing biblical wisdom and practical insights in order to help church leaders pursue and teach financial freedom as part of Christian discipleship. We believe this is a spiritual conversation, and this is a place where the church needs to lead the way in order to move our communities forward in how we steward God's resources. I'm your host, James Lenhoff, and I am so passionate about this conversation and helping leaders have the confidence to step into it. We believe that if we help people thrive financially and grow spiritually, it changes everything. And I am so excited to join you on this journey. This podcast is brought to you by Good Sense. If you'd like more information about what we're up to, you can go to our website at goodsensemovement.org. All right, let's get started with today's conversation. Today we're kicking off a two-part series on what stewardship looks like as we go through life. Different stages of life involve different experiences of being a faithful steward. It is a beautiful journey. It's a complicated journey. It has a lot of seasons in it. And this is something we need to be aware of so that as we move through these stages, or we are mentoring people who are in these different stages, we know the conversations we need to have. We know how we need to prepare them and empower them to step into stewardship as they manage their overall resources. One of the things that I find fascinating is that we tend to wait until people are up and on their own and in trouble, quite frankly, before we start having this conversation. And then we wonder why it's such a hard thing. They've been for years, in many cases for their entire lives, embedding behaviors and habits and decisions into their processes. And we have to kind of unwind all of that and start to unpack where their issues lie. We have to really do some deep work to undo what has just been habitually built in to how they approach their resources. And so we need to start early. And so we're going to spend today talking about childhood all the way through to that early career stage. And then next week, we'll dive into what happens from there. And both of these conversations are going to have a lot of moving parts. And so please feel free to email me with questions. I'm happy to get you specifics or give you some different ideas of how to build this into the conversations that you're having, how to even build it into your own family as you're mentoring your children, let alone the people that you might be leading in your church communities. So let's talk about that early stage of childhood. How do we engage kids in the stewardship of God's resources? Well, one of the things that I think is so counterintuitive is how we learn about money. More often than not, we think that kids will learn about money by us just telling them this is how money works. I see parents blocking their kids from unbelievably valuable learning because they're making decisions for them. I like to think of this as learning to walk. Kids learn how to manage God's resources much in the same way that they learn to walk. When they're little and they're starting to figure out how to walk, we don't lecture them on the laws of physics. We don't throw a book at them and say, read this, it'll teach you how to walk, teach you how muscles work. No, they learn how to walk by falling over and over and over again. They learn how to walk by trying it, failing at it, trying again, and failing at it hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times until they finally start to figure it out. Money is emotional. It's not mathematical. It's not logical. It's not rational. Our experience of money is so much more like that experience of learning to walk, but then we don't actually give our kids access to the trying and the failing that is required in order for them to really learn. And so one of the most important things that you can do as a parent or as a leader of parents is encourage parents to give kids a sandbox when it comes to money, to give them access to fail, give them access to decisions that they learn from. We all learn the same things. We all learn from buyer's remorse. We make the same mistakes. We buy the thing that has the pretty packaging, but it doesn't work the way it says it would. Or we buy the thing that we thought would make us feel better and it doesn't. Or we buy the thing that we want to buy in order to look like the other people we want to look like, and then we find out that actually isn't fulfilling. We all make all those same mistakes. The question is it going to cost your kid $5 or $500 to learn that mistake? It's the same learning. The earlier that we give kids access to this learning, the less it hurts, the faster they can recover. Just like we want them to learn to walk when they're really small, because the distance from their knee to the ground is really short. There's not a lot of pain that comes from that fall. But if we waited until they were 18 to get them a chance to learn how to walk, there's a lot of damage going to be done. And that's what I see happen. Parents block their kids from the growth that's available in money. And then when their kids go to college, they learn the hard way. They fall from a really great height. They get exposed to credit cards for the first time in their life, and they rack up a bunch of debt. They get a bunch of student loan debt. They find themselves buried in things they don't understand because it's their first time running with this stuff. We need to give kids the skills they need in order to be prepared for all of those things down the road, and it starts when they're young. And so what I like to encourage families to do is consider opening what I call the bank of mom and dad. The bank of mom and dad is an incredibly simple idea, but it is incredibly powerful. There are so many apps out there right now that you can use to establish this system, whether you use one of the apps I like is called Greenlight, but there's any number of options out there that will allow you to establish an allowance system for your kids where they're getting money that they get to have decision-making authority over. So one of the ways we block the learning is when we go through the grocery store and our kid says, buy me that useless piece of plastic, we say, oh no, that's a useless piece of plastic. We're not going to waste our money on that. Well, we know that through experience. They don't know that yet. And so one of the things that we can give them access to is that they buy it, and then that piece of plastic breaks in the car on the way home. And they learn it didn't do what I thought it would do. It wasn't worth the money, and they grow. We need to give them spaces to fall. They need to learn by failing. Failure is not the opposite of success. It's the process of success. It's how we learn. And so we need to give them access. And so in our family, the Bank of Mom and Dad pays 10% interest. And no, you can't open an account at our Bank of Mom and Dad, but the Bank of Mom and Dad pays 10% interest on our kids' accounts. We pay that interest. It's parent-paid interest, but we're encouraging saving. We're showing them the power of interest through experience. One of the mistakes I see people do is they'll go and they'll open a bank account at some bank for their kid, and they put all their birthday money in it, and it makes 0.0 something percent terrible in interest. And then 6 months later, the kid has made a penny in interest by leaving that money in the bank. And what they learn through experience is that saving is stupid. It's a waste of time. I should have just bought the video games and all the stuff I wanted. Why bother saving? But when we give them real powerful interest rates, it allows for that growth to happen and to show them this is really meaningful. Saving is very powerful. Compound interest is unbelievably powerful. And they only experience that if we give them access to it. The most important thing about the Bank of Mom and Dad is that we get out of the way and let the kids make decisions on their own. So when they want to buy something, we're not telling them they can't. We're asking them why. Why are you interested in this? What about this is exciting to you? And we're starting the conversation where they choose to buy it because they have the authority. But then when it breaks or it doesn't do what they hoped it would do, now we can have a productive conversation where we can ask the question, what happened there? Give me an insight into what you were hoping for and then how it didn't deliver on that. What can we learn from this? Rather than us saying when we use our own money and then it breaks in the car, see, I told you so. I told you that was a useless piece of plastic. All they learn from that experience is mom and dad know better than I do and I shouldn't ask for anything, right? We need to give them access to these things. As kids are growing and they're starting to take on more and more responsibility, we can start to give them the requirement of paying for some of their own needs. We can start to show them what it looks like to set aside money for saving, to set aside money for giving, and to also make sure they're prepared to buy their own shoes or to buy their own clothes, or as they get older, to pay for their own gas or their own insurance for their car. We're moving them away from money is only for things I want to I have to balance needs and wants and organize my intentions in order to make sure I'm prepared to pay for the things I need rather than just wasting it on things that I want. That is the foundational work that needs to start as soon as possible. I like to see kids starting on this path at the age of 5, where they can start to have some awareness, and you pay them a weekly allowance based on their age. That's the way that I've seen it work the best. And so if they're 5 years old, they get $5 a week, right? And over time, that grows. Every year they're getting a raise, but we're also then starting to pull in things that they have to spend money on. So as they're preteens and teens and they step into things like cell phones, we are making them pay for the phones. We're making them pay for the line on the cell phone plan. We're giving them responsibility that if you want this thing or you need this thing, that's your responsibility to pay for it. And they have to organize around the need to cover those costs. One of the other things I would encourage parents to consider is inviting your kids in to your stewardship as soon as possible, giving them access to what it looks like to be a faithful steward with your resources. I know a lot of times money is a taboo topic. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want our kids to know anything. But I actually think that prevents them from seeing what faithful stewardship looks like. And that means all of it, the warts included. And so if you are struggling with your stewardship, your kids can see it's hard to make these decisions and decide to be intentional and to make trade-offs that cost us things that we would want in order to step into obedience. The faster we can get them to be exposed to that with real money and real bills and high levels of cost, not just if you want a cell phone, it's $10 a month, but hey, this is our mortgage payment. This is what our homeowner's insurance costs. This is what it takes to run this household. This is how much we spend on groceries, right? The faster we can give them access to real world experience and navigating it as faithful stewards, the sooner they start to understand what it actually takes and what those disciplines look like. But also, don't hide your mistakes. Don't avoid the conversation of, yeah, we bought this house and we really are struggling to afford it. We may need to do something different. Or we bought this car on a whim and it's not what we hoped it would be and it's way too expensive and we're going to need to make a change and get rid of it. We want our kids to see those mistakes as well, because while we're learning, they can be learning too. So let's transition to high school and college. As they're in high school and maybe they're getting their first job and they're starting to have to prioritize more and more of their needs, they're starting to build more saving. One of the things I want kids to have access to is the experience of having money. I've talked about on this podcast the idea that the having of money is the hardest part. Just letting it be there, not letting our brain tell us all the things we should do with it and all the stuff we could buy with it, but actually just letting it be. The more time that we can give our kids access to there being money there that's theirs and that they have authority over, the more they get used to the idea of just the having of it, and they're not constantly spending it. This takes time. I know my kids have all gone through seasons where they would spend very aggressively because they wanted everything and they had the money and they just spent it all, and that's okay. They kind of have to get it out of their system. And I would much rather they get it out of their system when it's $5 and $10 at a time, rather than them racking up a bunch of credit card debt in college because there's no one there to stop them. And so as they transition and they get their first job and they're starting to accumulate, we're giving them access to the having of money. We're also making sure that they're in the discipline of giving, tithing on that income from the start, just being intentional about giving. And we're also making sure that they're prioritizing and tracking their spending. So we build in those disciplines at that foundational level when it's really easy and the numbers are small and the number of categories is few, right? We want to do it when it's simple so that when it's complicated, it's not overwhelming. If we wait until it's really complicated, then it's too complicated and they never do it. And so we start at a very early stage, giving them access to that discipline and that behavior, because that's what actually builds the muscle that they need to keep doing it as the number of categories expands and the number of bills grows. They need to have done this work at the simple level in order to be able to do it effectively when it gets more complex. When they transition into college, this is a season where we are now opening them up to the world at a level that they have not been exposed to, where they will get immediately a bunch of credit card applications in the mail. They will have access to a bunch of student loans. They will be able to rack up debt very quickly. And so we need to give them an understanding of what debt is, how it works. We do that by letting them in on the debt we have, showing them how that works, giving them access to a credit card early before they leave our house so that we can show them this is how this works and they can start to build an experience, work that muscle. I know that's weird for parents to hear me say, but I love getting credit cards in teenagers' hands when they're still under my roof and I can explain it and I can watch it and I can tell them how this works and they can be connected to it in a way that really gives them clarity and confidence. Because if I wait until they get to college, they're going to get credit card applications in the mail and they're going to fill them out and immediately go spend that money because they don't know how it works. And so we need to give them some of that experience early as we help them transition out into the real world. While they're in college, we really want to make sure they understand the consequences of debt, what these student loans look like, how they work over the long term. Give them experience if you've had that experience yourself. Give them access to your experience with it, what you had to wrestle through. Let them learn from your struggle and your pain. Don't hide it from them, but give them an understanding that this is a very long process. This takes time. And when you take on this much debt, it's not something that's easy to overcome. And so take that with a lot of thoughtfulness. Count the cost before you step into those things. Think about your major. What are you going to do? What's the career path that you're on? Does it make sense? Are we actually going to see that the career you step into will create generally enough income to be able to overcome the debt that you're taking to get that degree, right? If not, maybe we think about an associate's degree or a trade school, or you work while you're doing it. What do we need to do in order to make this workable as you go forward? I see kids constantly coming out of school, and that was never part of the conversation. It was just go follow your dreams, go discover who you are. And that process of discovery costs a lot of money and leaves them with a lot of debt. And then they step into a career where they can't afford to pay that debt off, right? And so we need to be coaching them and helping them think clearly as faithful stewards of their talents, of their skills, of their time, and also of their resources. How are we actually going to honor God all the way through and not set ourselves up to be hamstrung coming out of college with a big pile of debt and an income that won't cover it? Once they transition into that early career, and so if this is you, if you're listening and you're early in your career, this is the time when all the foundation needs to be set. Right out of the gate, get into the behaviors of giving 10% of your income, of saving at least 10% of your income, of living on the rest, so that you're already putting some of those boundaries in place. It is so much harder to add those later when you've allowed your expenses to run right to the edge of your income for so long. Suddenly trying to inject those disciplines 10 years from now is a much heavier lift than if you start with them from the get-go. You're used to living on little, and so stay there. Continue to focus on your net worth. If you come out of school with student loan debt, recognize that your net worth is negative. You are worth less than zero on paper. That is not your human worth, but it is mathematically your net worth. Act like it. I talk to physicians who are coming out of school, out of medical school, and I tell them all the time, right now, you are probably the poorest person in every room you walk into. I don't care how much income you're making. You're walking into that room with a negative $250,000 net worth. Act like it until it's not the case. Recognize where you really are in that journey. And if you are starting with a really substantial negative net worth, make sure that you are making decisions from that framework rather than from a framework that's based entirely on your income. We want to make sure that we put these disciplines in place of taking advantage of the match on your 401k, that we're building in the discipline of saving for retirement early, because if you start early, it costs so much less. You save so much less to get there than if you wait 10 years or more. Building in at that foundational level some of these disciplines of faithful stewardship, it is so much easier to do from day one. And so if you are mentoring a young person who's coming out of college, you are a young person who just started in their career, you have kids that are in that stage, step into this conversation. It is so critical. It will save so much pain and so much confusion and so many years worth of undoing the behaviors that were just ingrained if we catch these young families early and we give them the skill set and the discipline they need to build these things in now while it doesn't hurt as much to unwind what they're used to. Because once it's what you're used to, it's so much easier to maintain. And so that's where we're going to stop for today. This is what it looks like for us to teach stewardship in the early stages and into that launch phase. Come back next week, and we're going to talk about what it looks like in that early adulthood, early family stage, and then further on into retirement and beyond. I'm so excited about this conversation. I know in the communities that you lead, you have all of these families at all these different stages. Stewardship is a journey that is always inviting us to more. And we want to recognize, based on the stage we're in, what that next step in that journey looks like. Well, thank you so much for listening to the Faithful Steward podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes for links and other information that we mentioned in today's episode. Also, be sure to check out our website at goodsensemovement.org to get all the resources we offer churches to help equip them in teaching financial stewardship to their community. If you have any questions or any topics you want to make sure we cover on our show, you can email me at jameslenhoff@goodsensemovement.org. I'd love to hear from you. I hope you all have a great week. We'll talk to you next week.